I come before you this afternoon as a proud Briton, not ashamed, as a patriot that loves his nation, his people, our culture, our industry and way of life. But I am absolutely ashamed at the abomination that's our political establishment in Parliament. In their desperation to keep us subservient to the EU, much of our political class is now bending the Constitution to breaking point. As Britons, as patriots, we cannot idly stand by as a Europhile establishment sells us out. I also come before you this afternoon as a proud Scot. I've just made it across the border today because the SNP quite haven't had their way yet. What hypocrisy they have that they'll stand and aid and abet to collapse the government, to try and keep us in the EU, yet they say we can't crash out the European Union, but the SNP are quite happy to have us crash out our union. One that will see a hard border at Carlisle when they say that we could or they could not suffer a hard border at Calais. What hypocrites, and shaming them for abandoning Scotland's fishermen. So what's it all for? Why do we need to stay in the European Union? Well, the political class hide behind trade, so we'll indulge them. But the EU has morphed from what was missold to us as a common market to become something akin to a super state. Even in trade, we shouldn't be beholden to that, because no amount of money, no amount of trade, no amount of worldly goods makes us eternal. The only way we live forever is through our children. And our vote in 2016, the biggest in British history, was to pass the next generation the industry and the freedom we were bestowed by the last. To make their own lives, to make their own futures, free from the diktats of Brussels. Instead, what do we find? A political establishment that want to rob us and surrender that freedom to unelected globalists in Brussels. Now is a battle, and one where we cannot surrender. We should never give up our freedom, never give up being free to govern our own affairs, and never give up on being able to hold and husband vital industries like our fishing for generations to come. To me, it's more than regrettable that our political establishment's philosophy is one that does not believe in this nation as a state, nor in safeguarding that nation and our people's vital interests. Britain's fishing communities, our way of life, have suffered hell for the political establishment's beliefs. We were sold out on the altar of the politicians' dreams for a federal Europe. I was very interested the other day to see Ms. Thunberg held up and been used to push big world government about environmental damage. No organisation or policy has done as much environmental damage as a common fisheries policy. I would add to that no organisation or policy has done as much to rob young men like me of our dreams. We are now in a position, as a nation, as an industry, where 60% of the resources that are caught in our waters are by EU vessels. We only receive 25% of the internationally agreed total allowable catches, yet we contribute 50% of the waters to the common EU pot. Yet, based on the international principle of zonal attachment, it should be, based on what's caught in our waters, 60% of the TACs that Britain should receive. Over double. To add insult to injury, the EU then comes back and robs us even more, because of the 25% we do receive, half of that is held by EU-owned but UK-registered flagships. Shameful economic penetration forced upon us by freedom of establishment. Forced because the ECJ overturned Mrs. Thatcher's government's legislation to have a strong economic link to stop them. Now we have the chance to reverse that injustice. The insult to our democracy, to our sovereignty of our Parliament that was factor tame. Because of flagships, and because the EU directly appropriates over half our resources, we are now in a position where the indigenous British fishing industry is only catching 12.5% of the TACs when it should be 60%. We are working on a fifth of what is rightfully ours. Is it any wonder that we've seen our coastal communities smashed? Yet, we look across at Norway, our North Sea neighbour, and they're flourishing. What's the difference? We share the same seas, we share the same fish stocks in many respects. The only difference is political. And it's that politics that we're fighting against, and that politics we will fight against to the bitter end. So, now we come to the future battle. And I think this is the key that has been missold to the British people. Article 50 is part of an international treaty. That completely abrogates the common fisheries policy and exit. There is no such thing as historical rights that you might hear about. There's no such things as access rights that will continue or resource shares. We have a clean slate to take back what's ours, automatically repatriating all our waters and all our resources within an exclusive economic zone, where, under the United Nations Convention and the Law of the Seas, we will be a normal, independent coastal state, able to husband our resources and our waters with best management and best science as we see fit. We do not need to be beholden to Brussels. We do not need to be beholden to the common fisheries policy, as some Remainers and some in government suggest. As I say, UNCLOS makes us a normal independent coastal state, no different to Norway, Iceland or Faroe. And those laws bestow on us the ability to manage our own resources, the ability to cooperate with our neighbours to husband shared stocks, but on our own terms, doing reciprocal deals with our neighbours where it suits. So I really want to nail the Remainers' lie that UNCLOS somehow says that we should remain subservient. UNCLOS gives us exclusive sovereignty. UNCLOS says we can use our discretion to manage our resources. UNCLOS says we should only cooperate, not become some sort of slaves to the CFP forevermore. A key one now being bandied about is UNCLOS says we should minimise economic dislocation. It says minimise. It doesn't say avoid. And as we saw with the Humber ports that used to fish in Iceland, with Grimsby and with Hull, minimise has a very broad definition. But anyway, this is academic, the Remainers' arguments, trying to pick legal loopholes in UNCLOS, just as they're trying to pick legal loopholes in Parliament. Because the main thing is do Remainers suggest that Iceland, Norway, Faroe should open up their waters to economic exploitation by the EU or somehow be beholden to Brussels? Of course they don't. Do the Humber fleet have historic rights to Iceland? Of course not. The whole of Remain's argument is absurd. And therefore, I ask you all here today to help us ensure going forward that we aren't pushed back into being in orbit and somehow beholden to the CFP by Sir Humphrey and Whitehall. And I ask you to be vigilant for that. That would effectively be Brexit in name only, which is exactly what Mrs May's withdrawal agreement and the surrender bill cause. Even without the backstop, the withdrawal agreement is the mere tip of a lethal iceberg. What that does is allows the establishment to knit us back into EU orbit through a series of bilateral agreements. And that is what we are extremely worried about, that we leave the common fisheries policy, we become an independent coastal state, but effectively, because we're in orbit to EU rules and CFP associate membership, it's Brexit in name only. So the big problem is, even if we get rid of the backstop, we'd still be trapped in the transition. And what the transition allows the EU to do is to implement detrimental rules to cull what's left of our fleet. You might ask, why would they do that? But the reason for them to do it is they've every incentive to do so. Because under international law, if a nation cannot catch all its resources, it must give the surplus to its neighbours. So the EU has every incentive to smash our fleet during the transition and then reach over the fence and grab what we can no longer catch ourselves. On top of that, the withdrawal agreement obliges us, is a polite word, to adopt a political declaration. One that says we must reach an agreement in fisheries, one that says it should be based on non-discrimination, which is the fundamental founding principle of equal access to a common resource. A political declaration that says fisheries should be on a level playing field, which I presume will be EU rules, and all whilst being traded as part of the wider economic relationship. And, to add even better into it, it's all to be based on current access and quota shares. Now, they say it won't be. That's been dropped from the text. It might have been dropped from the text, but it certainly has not been dropped in intention. So we can have a clean break under international law, under the treaties, under Article 50, and we must not roll over current arrangements. Yet that is what Steve Barclay has admitted the government intends to do. If Boris wishes to exercise the ghost of Edward Heath, if he wants to avoid, in his words, reprehensibly trading fishing away, he must ensure that we have a clean exit and are free entirely to exercise exclusive sovereignty over our EEZ. Any less than that, any less than complete freedom, any less than having complete control of our waters, any less than having a rightful repatriation of our resources, and fishing has been sold out a second time, and the opportunity of a £6 to £8 billion industry has been thrown to the wind. One of the things that the government, and I believe Steve Barclay was worried about, was what Remain allude to, which is markets. Remain say we need to capitulate on access to our fisheries in order to have access for markets. And the EU, rightly, from their point of view, has identified this as their only lever. But that misses the point. If the EU can't access our waters, and if the EU can't make off with half our fish, and they already rely hugely on our exports, they are going to need us and our exports of seafood that we catch ourselves for our coastal communities more than ever. The government must not capitulate to EU demands and threats for access for markets. We have such a strong position with international law and market dynamics on our side. So we're inches from freedom for our country and for our fishing. But instead of uniting behind this nation, behind a free and independent and sovereign nation once again, what do we find? After 3 years, near anarchy, constitutional corruption, and total public dissatisfaction. MPs are there to represent our grievances, but they themselves have now become the grievance. I say that the enemies of this nation in Brussels have flourished alongside their subversion. This Parliament is now no longer representative of the people. Yet what do we find in their righteous indignation? Will they put themselves to the people they purport to represent? No, they will not. And now, after 3 years of misgovernment, what do they have? They're moving to usurp the government and extend this life of this worthless, dishonourable Parliament to keep us in the EU. They are now driving us into constitutional conditions similar to the Civil War. For, ladies and gentlemen, an immovable Parliament is just as obnoxious as an immovable king. We have a political class now in this country who will do anything to keep this nation in the EU. I think that they're just immoral, self-serving tricksters that will see industries like ours, businesses like ours, communities like ours, and a way of life like ours suffer to try and keep their dream of a united Europe alive. They're unfit to run a brothel, let alone to run this great nation. Now, to conclude, before I hand over to my esteemed friend and colleague, Mr. Paterson, we are determined by any means necessary, and whatever the cost, to get this country out of Europe. The danger we now face to our constitution and our democracy is enormous. Our resistance, your resistance against it, must continue to be enormous. Don't give up because it's 3 years. Don't give up because they sit in that house. It's we, the people, that control this country and who are sovereign. Never give up our birthright and never let them get away with what they're doing now. Brexiteers must keep going forward together to clean this rotten parliament from the political class. The greater the fist we make together as a people, the harder the blow will be on them. The time for nicety is over. If they want a fight, they can have one. So I ask you here today, do you believe in this nation, in its people, and that we can win this fight to be free? Yes. Yes. The EU believes, because of the Remainers, that we, the British people, don't want to be free, but only want capitulation. So I ask you, do you want your children to be free? Yes! This great nation and its freedoms didn't fall from the sky, but were built and fought for by generations, so we are free. It's through our hard work, our perseverance, and our endeavours that this country can be free and flourish great and free once again. And we will, because behind us, behind Brexit, stands the greatest ally on this earth. And that is our own people. And Remain can never thwart that and their wish to be free. Thank you very much.
To see our future videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon. That way you'll get a notification by email as soon as a new video is available. In the meantime, please do help us out and like and share or retweet this post so your friends and followers can see it too.